So I get home from work today, and look what has arrived in the mail. Complete Calvin and Hobbes. 4 volumes with the softcover version. I've seen the hardcover version, but it looks more cumbersome, to be honest, than this one. A bit harder to actually read. So let's unbox this thing and see what it looks like inside. It's quite heavy, quite substantial. One thing that's nice is that these images on the top don't appear to have been glued on. In the hardback version, these are just like pieces of paper or cardstock or what have you, images that have been glued onto the surface, and they look like they can come off easily. This does not have that problem. It looks like it's much more securely attached. The box construction in general looks more secure than the hardcover version. I'm not sure if that's an upgrade from the last one. They may have taken some of fans' concerns into account, because some people were complaining about that. So that's the image on that side. Classic. Bill Watterson did some new art, new images for the complete edition. Some of it's taken from old artwork, but there is some new stuff in here. There may still be a couple pieces of art that are missing that you can find in the original paperbacks. I think some of the long poems and stories that he illustrated and are like in the special editions, in the complete or the, not the complete, what's it called? The authorized or the essential Calvin and Hobbes. Those special editions I think have some extra stuff that may not be in here, which is a bit of a shame because it would be nice if it was actually complete. But what can you do? Let's see. There's a big tag here on the top. Let's see if this comes off. Oh yeah. That just pops right off. Good. Nothing worse than buying special edition things like this and then they have stuff stuck to them that wrecks it when you take it off. Alright, let's look at volume 1 here. That's really nice. Again, unlike the hardcover versions, the images are not glued onto it. They're actually part of the cover itself. It looks very sturdily constructed. It's very nice to the touch. It's soft, easy to turn. It has these flaps on the inside, which is a nice touch. You can use them as bookmarks, though I probably won't. Book 1. 1985 to 1987. First impressions right off the bat, I would definitely read this more often than I would read the hardcover version because it's easier to handle, easier to flip through. Great introduction by Bill Watterson. A lot of his early cartoons, which is very interesting. There's the cat that's the inspiration for Hobbes. Some of the artwork that Bill Watterson's been doing recently. As you may know, he's kind of a recluse now. He's been living off, mostly away from the public eye, doing painting landscapes. No chance of him returning to cartooning anytime soon, as far as anyone knows, which is really too bad. There's a great documentary on him coming out soon called Dear Mr. Watterson. It doesn't have him in it, which makes sense since he never shows his face much. But it Oh, look at that. It does contain some of those illustrated stories from the paperback versions. If that's true, then this is much more complete than I thought, and it might actually have everything, which is great to hear. That's fantastic. If that's true, then if you're a real completist, all you really need to do is buy the complete Calvin and Hobbes, and you're set. Fantastic print quality. The pages are a little bit off-white, and then you can see that each individual image, each individual strip is set into it, and it's plain white. At the bottom of each of these pages, you can see the actual dates where each of the strips were published. So you can track them down to the exact day, which is really nice. A lot of the paperback collections that were released as comic strips came out, the order isn't necessarily strictly chronological. Some of them were rearranged, I believe. But this has them all back in the correct order. The Yukon song. This was in the... this is on like the first page of Yukon Ho, on the inside the front flap. It wasn't actually part of any of the comic strips. I'm just so glad that they included this stuff. Maybe it was in the hardback version, I just didn't notice it, but I thought it wasn't. This is really nice. That looks fantastic. Let's look at some of the other ones. Calvin and Hobbes Zombies, appropriate for this day and age. Singing the Yukon song, looks like. The binding doesn't crack. It seems very sturdily put together. It's not sewn or anything. Let's see if I can get you a close-up of what the binding looks like. It looks like that. So it looks to be glued, but it seems to be done very well. There's no cracking or creasing of the binding. It lies flat very nicely. Very easy to read. As I said before, very high paper quality. The colors and the blacks and whites are very crisp. And I love the incidental artwork that's inset between some of the strips. Some of it I believe is new, and some of it is from the trade paperbacks. Stupendous Man. I love that character. Oh, look, here's another one. Another one of these big full-page strips that he did for the trades. This stuff is fantastic, because this is like a great example of the kind of art that Bill Watterson was aiming for. The full-page Crazy Cat type illustrations, where they would have very unusual arrangements of panels. They were able to use up much more space. The very limited sizes that you could draw comics in the newspapers, especially during his time, and is increasingly true now. He felt really limited what he could do as a comic book artist, and he was right. So he really branched out and did some fantastic things in the trade paperbacks, which were great showcases for what he was aiming to do. He always claimed that he had no idea how to draw dinosaurs and he made it up as he went. But I always liked his dinosaurs. I think they look fantastic. I think that's another example of some of the new art that he's done, that he added to embellish the complete Calvin Hobbes. Let's take a quick look at some of the other ones we have in here. Volume 3. Again, this looks like new art. Oh, here's another one with the giant strips. I love how space molds itself around the things that Calvin turns into. Like somehow he's inside this bathroom. There's no way the Nelvin could fit in there, but you don't really question it. house changes shape depending on what it needs to be. It's fantastic to read the complete set and go from the beginning to the end, and you can watch his style develop organically. It becomes much more confident. Everyone was sad when it went out of newspapers. I was quite young when that happened, but I was sad as well. I grew up on the trades, really, on the trade paperbacks, not so much reading it in newspapers. But looking back, as most people have pointed out, it's probably a good thing that it went out when it did. Unlike a lot of comic strips that went on for decades and decades and just became parodies of themselves. Calvin Hobbes went out on top and just cemented its reputation forever. Oh, I love the little poems in these things. He's a fantastic cartoonist. Really underrated. Well, maybe he's not really underrated. But when people talk about great cartoonists, for some reason they don't really mention Bill Watterson as much as they should. One of those cartoonists who seems to be able to draw anything. Let's look at the last one here. Book 4. Went out in 95. Wow. That's coming up on 20 years ago, which is hard to wrap your mind around. As they go on, his layouts get more and more interesting. Everything gets more detailed. He starts experimenting more and more with panel layouts and colors. I think I read somewhere where back in the time that he was writing this, artists didn't have a whole lot of control over the color, but I think he gained a lot more over time. It's also interesting to see how in the early strips, the Sunday papers, the Sunday strips are just 3 rows, right? And oftentimes the first one gets cut off by the newspaper. But after Calvin Hobbes had become so popular, he started demanding whole half pages to do comic strips in. And he was able to get it because he was so popular, even though people hated it. Or newspapers hated it. The readers loved it. Because he had a whole half page, he could start doing all sorts of things that you could never do when you're constricted to the normal format. It looks more like a great layout from a graphic novel than a Sunday comic strip. I don't really understand why no one else learned from that. There are some okay comic strips still in the newspaper, but most of them don't seem to try anything particularly new, or don't try and advance the medium in the way that Bill Watterson did. Bill Watterson was very intentional about that, about being subversive with the comic strip form and trying to return it to what it used to be in the days of things like Crazy Cat and Pogo that he drew a lot of inspiration from. You know, this is the only comic strip that I remember reading in a newspaper. I'm sure he must have read it off and on as a child, but this is the only one that I remember. One of the very bittersweet ones. I love his Cthulhian monsters that start showing up in a lot of the snow creations. As a kid, I always wanted to build things like this in the snow, but it quickly became apparent that it's not possible to get snow to do that. But that's all right. Oh, this is a great one. Bill Watterson going after the just the exploitation in a lot of comic strips, or comic books especially today, superhero ones. Very little content, mostly sensationalism, very little creativity, at least from what I've seen. There's some exceptions. Maybe I'll make some videos on those later. But Calvin Hobbes is one of the greats. Can easily rival any of the mainstream comic books from Marvel or DC or anything like that. T-Rexes and F-14s. It's one of the great images of our time. This is a great piece of pop art right there. A T-Rex and F-14, that's just pure childhood. Well, that's about it for this. I can only give my strong recommendation to this from what I've seen so far. It's beautifully bound, beautifully put together, much more readable, it looks like, than the hardcover version. The case looks great. Oh, that's no good. Look at that. There's a page wrinkle down here. I don't know what I'm going to do about that. We'll see. That should not be there. Well, we'll see about that. I guess that's one downside. Maybe that's just a misprinting. Other than that, though, the look of the case is very sturdy. It's going to hold up for a long time, it looks like. So it's a great way, if you want a sort of archival collection of Calvin Hobbes, you want to have everything all together, this is the thing to get. You can get this or the hardcover version, but the advantage of this, as far as I can see, is that you're much more likely to actually read them in this form than in the hardcover version, which is quite unwieldy. And I found it wasn't bound all that well. It seemed the binding in that one seemed to come apart a bit. We'll see how this one holds up. But so far, I am very impressed. It's a beautiful work, and it's a complete collection of one of the great works in comic book history. So, check it out. It's half price on Amazon. It's only $50, down from $100. So that is a fantastic deal, and worth being in anyone's collection. Alright, thanks for watching. If you liked the video, like and subscribe to the channel, and get more reviews, unboxings, and all sorts of geek-related videos. Thanks.